All right, everybody. Like I just mentioned, I guess live on radio, I have a lot of interviews today with different people. A lot of them were just happened today and yesterday. They couldn't come on live, so I was glad I was able to get them to come on. And one of those is Brad Restituto. We do the Breast Stop podcast with each other. It's his podcast every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm a producer on it. You can hear it at night. And if you follow my Twitter, you know when we go live. So be sure to follow me at Spencer the Wiz. That's where you can also follow all my articles and everything like that. Without further ado, Brad, thank you so much for coming on the Delivering Sports Show today. How you doing?
Spence, thanks for having me, man. One of the most talked about NFL drafts that I can remember in over a decade, and that was just the day one. So excited to jump on with you and recap some of the exciting picks and exciting news from yesterday's day one.
Yeah, and we'll actually start out with some news that happened right before the draft that kind of took over the narrative for a while, and that's Aaron Rodgers. He made it public that he wants out of Green Bay. There's a lot of things that go along with this, right? Because they also didn't select another weapon. We're going on like 5-7 years now where they just don't select anything for him in the first round. And, you know, this was before their selection even. But is it possible? Do you see him coming out? I mean, he's 38 years old. Could you see him on the move? What does a trade like that look like? I mean, there's so much to, kind of go over here.
Well, the crazy thing to me, Spence, about this is the fact that it went public of teams making calls and really trying to pursue him. I mean, this is the most action we've seen as far as that conversation goes, because Aaron Rodgers has let it be known publicly before that hasn't been happy with the direction sometimes the team has gone. They've still won a bunch of games regardless of who they've drafted, basically on the shoulders of Aaron Rodgers. But I'm not surprised that he really wants to move on. But I think it really started stirring the conversation when it came out that San Francisco offered the third overall pick, multiple picks, and Jimmy Garoppolo to maybe get the Packers off of him. And the Packers, unsurprisingly, said they're not willing to budge. But I think the interesting thing, Spence, is Green Bay maybe should take a second look at that decision of not taking the calls and being so kind of steadfast and not wanting to move off Rodgers. Because if you look at the duration of his contract and look where they're at, and they've already invested a decision emotionally and really not just emotionally, but they actually moved up in the first round last year to draft Jordan Love. So it shouldn't be surprising that maybe they should really consider if a team is willing to offer a king's ransom for Aaron Rodgers. And especially this could be the highest value he may have at this point, where all the conversation's going that way. Because if the path looks clear that Rodgers won't be back, whether it's this year or next year, his value is going to decrease because people are going to know he's going to hit the open market, or, the ball is more in the court of the player more so than the organization.
It's okay. So I'm curious. I didn't know that the 49ers had offered the third overall pick. I guess, do the Packers really believe that he has that the team has that much left in them? I mean, they're getting dogged in the playoffs year in and year out. They're not getting that close to the Super Bowl, and he's only getting older. If you can get a truckload of picks for him and the third overall pick to potentially get Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell, you drafted Jordan Love for a reason in the first round. And you moved up to get him, not to have him sitting around forever. Should they have thought about it a lot more than they did potentially? Because they say Paxton Lynch came out and said it just didn't happen. There's no way they were gonna move him. I think they should have been a little more open to the idea.
I agree, Spence. I mean, I think they should kind of take a step back and consider it. I mean, if you really want to talk about the future of people's jobs and the future of this organization, Aaron Rodgers is not going to play forever. Does he got a few more good years left in him? Absolutely. But we know he's got many interests aside from football and is not necessarily married to the game, even like Tom Brady. Rodgers feels he can play at a high level for many years. But if he's very adamant about not going back to Green Bay, I mean, where does the leverage fall? I mean, he may be under contract, but if he decides not to show, that's his choice. And then Green Bay's really stuck. So if you can get a king's ransom, multiple picks, multiple players, and solid picks, I think it's certainly worth considering. Clearly, they're not going to get any first-round picks in this year's draft, but they can certainly set themselves up for the future. You talk about a team like Denver, who is rumored in this conversation, San Francisco, the Raiders, Spence, and I think I texted you last night. If you're the Raiders, and you're willing to trade Derek Carr, which is certainly a serviceable quarterback that's going to step in if this trade was made between these two teams right away and start, and then give multiple first round, second round, third round future picks. If you're the Raiders, I would try and do everything to bring Aaron Rodgers to Las Vegas, Spence, because, I mean, you've already showed that you're not moving necessarily in the direction to compete for the division. I think many people think if Aaron Rodgers was under center with some of the weapons like Waller, Ruggs, Jacobs in the backfield, this immediately would catapult the Raiders into the playoff conversation and maybe more.
No, you've lost your mind, Brad. That is absolutely untrue about the Raiders. Some of these other teams, sure, but think about it this way. The Raiders, for whatever reason, had to disband tomorrow. So their whole team was, taken off, and they were all free agents. On the defensive side of the ball, only 3 of them would be starters anywhere else in the NFL. Only 3 of them. I'm not talking about Pro Bowlers. I'm not talking about all pros. I'm talking about guys who could step on a football team and start. Only 3 players. I don't care if you have prime Tom Brady, prime Michael Vick, whoever the case may be. The Raiders have a 0% chance probability of going to the playoffs next year, no matter who it is, and especially not a 38-year-old Aaron Rodgers. I'll just say that right now. So I'll bounce it back to you, and you kind of talked about a few teams, but what team goes immediately or will be probably top 5 Super Bowl odds if Aaron Rodgers is traded to their team?
I think any team that acquires Aaron Rodgers will immediately move into the top 5 conversation. He's that good, Spence. He's carried the Green Bay franchise on his shoulders for over a decade. You've talked about what they have not added around him as far as weaponry. They have Devontae Adams, who is a perennial Hall of Famer. Is that because of Aaron Rodgers? But that's really the only name to speak of besides a couple of offensive linemen that have been all-pro caliber players that have been around him for a decade. We saw what they were like when he wasn't under center a few years ago with an injury. They were probably the worst team in the entire league. I think he catapults any team in the entire NFL into the top 5 conversation immediately. And I know you don't think that's the case with the Raiders. They've got a few guys that could probably be starters. In Dockway, they added a couple guys they're looking to get some more productivity out of. But he's that good, Spence, where he will keep you in every game possibly within one possession, regardless of the team that he goes to.
It's truly incredible. So we talked about it in the beginning of this Aaron Rodgers conversation. We'll transition over to them now. One of the best smokescreens, in my opinion, in NFL history. It's the 3rd overall pick. You called it really early on. Of course, you get credit for that. Mac Jones was never in the conversation. I think it may have been in the front office, but I think they were always kind of targeting Trey Lance. At the end of the day, he was always going to be their guy. What's your take on the 3rd overall pick? Do you think Trey Lance plays at any point this year? Like, what does the future of the 49ers look like?
Yeah, Spence, I'm excited that I have a chance to talk to you about this. I tried to call you immediately after the pick because I was very happy. I love to be right. And in this one, I wasn't going to jump off the bandwagon. I said it very early on that it just didn't make any sense. If you're going to move up that high, you've got to draft somebody with a high ceiling. I don't know how good Mac Jones will or will not be, but he's certainly limited. He has a ceiling that is not as high as the other top 3 guys in this draft. And the facts are we're in an NFL now where you need a quarterback that can get you between 2 and 4 first downs a game with his legs. Everything they talked about with Trey Lance was very positive, the intangibles. Certainly we don't have a lot of on-field tape at this point that's going to blow you away to the point where it's unanimous that he's going to be a top 3 pick, but certainly they felt confident enough in what he can do on the field. They're happy with what he can do off the field. And I think it's a great pick, Spence. I think what I told you many times on the rest stop and even off air that I think Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are 2 of the smartest football guys around. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have their jobs forever. Regardless of who this 3rd overall pick was, if you do not get back to the Super Bowl with this new quarterback, it's going to be a fail. So it's a lot of pressure on whoever takes over that position after Jimmy Garoppolo because you have a lot of pieces in place defensively and offensively with some offensive linemen, some skill position players. I mean, they're not great. They still need to upgrade there, but Kyle Shanahan runs such a great scheme offensively. He makes people look better than they probably are. So Trey Lance is going to be able to run this play action game. He's going to be able to be effective and efficient in Kyle Shanahan's offense and probably do some things that when you saw success with the 49ers with Colin Kaepernick that Trey Lance will be able to do, but maybe better. I don't think he gets the start right away. That's kind of what the consensus have been amongst the 49ers and amongst the media. But I'm curious that I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is as bad as everybody thinks. Everybody's ready to write off Jimmy Garoppolo like he's some sucker that has been completely awful and his time in the NFL as a starter is over. I think that's ridiculous. Spence, when he got acquired from New England to San Francisco, he won 5 games in a row in the back end of that season, and I don't think he threw a pick. And then my memory serves me correctly, I think they went to the Super Bowl that following year, and then of course he had some injuries. So, I mean, we don't even have a huge sample size of what he's done in San Francisco, mostly because of injury. And I know he's made some mistakes and he's upset some people by not being as effective. But I think he's had more good moments than bad. And I don't think, if healthy, that he's going to not lead you to a winning record. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation because I think Garoppolo plays with a chip on his shoulder. I think he puts pressure on the 49ers to keep him in the lineup by winning games and competing for a playoff spot. And then I think the San Francisco 49ers have an interesting situation on their hands because if Garoppolo takes you to the playoffs or gets you to that point, and at some point you pull the trigger on a trade or you go to Lance and it doesn't work out as well, people start losing their jobs.
What do you think a move like this does for Garoppolo? We know he was upset about it, but of course anybody would be upset. That's a normal human reaction. Do you think it ultimately encourages him and drives him to be a better quarterback, or does he just start to desensitize himself, and is it going to fall apart quickly in San Francisco?
No, I think the first most of what you said. I think it absolutely motivates Jimmy G. I think it puts an extra chip on his shoulder. Not that he's already had ton of it coming out of a small school, sitting behind Brady, being traded. I think Garoppolo comes out and probably has, if not the best start to his career, something that reminds you of what he was when he was doing really well in the league. I think this absolutely elevates the play of him. I think he starts off the season on fire, and if he can stay healthy, I think it increases his trade value if San Francisco decides at the deadline they want to move on from him. But if you're winning games, Spence, in a tough NFC conference and a tough division, how do you move off a guy for another guy that may not be ready to take the reins? I think it's gonna bode for an interesting conversation and an interesting dilemma for the 49ers if they don't trade him before the start of the season, which I still think is an option.
No doubt. So we'll transition to another quarterback who was taken a little later than a lot expected, and that was Justin Fields, who, of course, the Bears moved up to get there, I think, with the Cowboys. I mean, the Chicago was criticized all offseason for all of their moves, and they had gotten Andy Dalton, and everyone was saying there's a big joke. But now they seemingly have gotten their franchise guy who will likely start day one for them. What's your initial reaction to the Bears getting a starting caliber quarterback for the first time in like 20 years, it feels like?
Yeah, I thought it was the absolute move of the entire first round, Spence. I thought it was an absolute home run by Chicago moving up to get Justin Fields. I'm very high on Justin Fields. He was a top recruit coming out of high school in Georgia. He was successful in high school. He came and transitioned. He got signed to the University of Georgia and then transitioned to Ohio State as a transfer and had a lot of success there. He showed complete toughness in the college football playoffs. Was he perfect? No, but he's certainly somebody with a very high ceiling. And I thought, and the Bears had a winning record with Mitchell Trubisky. I think 23-18, something like that, a very high win percentage. I think the Bears have defensive pieces. They have a few offensive pieces, and I think they absolutely hit a home run. I think Justin Fields is going to be in the conversation with Trevor Lawrence as the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft. With all the quarterbacks that will eventually be drafted, there's still guys that will be going off the board later today and over the weekend. And I think the top 2 unanimously will be Fields and Lawrence. That's yet to be determined, of course, but I think Chicago hit an absolute home run. I think it gives the Chicago Bear fans something to be as excited about as they've ever been in their lifetime, because this guy, I know he hasn't taken one snap, but if he stays healthy, I think he'll go down as a top 2, top 3 quarterback in the history of this franchise, and certainly better than anybody they've had in multiple decades. So if you're a Bears fan, if you're a Justin Fields fan, I think it's a great fit. I think it saves the job of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. And Matt Nagy, who was known to be an offensive wizard, now has a guy at his disposal at his disposal that can be a playmaker and should elevate and make your team better. It's not going to be an easy transition, Spence, to come in day one in the NFL and light it up. We've seen guys be successful, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, but these guys didn't win a bunch of games, Spence. The Bears are a little bit better than those two teams, but I'm rooting for Justin Fields. I think it's a great pick for the Bears, and I think it's a great fit for Chicago, because now you got a guy day one that's going to come in and start. And if it, I think you got to ride with him the whole way, but if by chance he gets injured, you still got a guy that you invested in that could come in and maybe win you a few games.
No doubt. I think it was also a really great move, and gives him a chance, maybe not this season because he's just so young, and he's a long way to go with like reading his progressions, understanding pressure, everything like that. But of course, every rookie quarterback does. One more, and I know you're not a Vikings fan anymore, but I still think you pay attention to them. They select Christian Darrisaw, 23rd overall. I think a very good selection at the offensive tackle. I think he slid a little bit. How do you feel about the pick as a former Vikings fan? And does it feel like they're doubling down on their team, or do they just make a really smart move here?
A little bit of both, Spence. I actually was hoping Fields would fall to 14 and the Vikings would make a very bold move and take him as the future of their franchise, even though they have a lot of holes that they needed to fill. That didn't happen. The Bears went ahead and climbed everyone. But Rick Spielman, Spence, he's got the nickname in Minnesota, Trader Rick, because he's been more active than any other GM in the entire draft over the last 5 to 10 years of trading back and acquiring picks. They had the most picks in the entire draft last year. He makes another solid move this year. The Vikings had their eyes on a couple guys on the offensive line, Darrisaw being one. They were able to trade back from 14 to 23, still get a guy that they liked and acquire a couple third-round picks. So now they have 4 third-round picks and I believe 4 fourth-round picks going into day 2. They don't have a second-round pick because they gave that to Jacksonville with the Yannick Ngakoue trade earlier in the year. So now Spielman has a lot of ammunition to move up into the second round and maybe get a guy that they're targeting. So he's done another fantastic job, Spielman. But now, Spence, it's a matter of picking the right guys, because of all those picks you had last year, only a handful made the 53-man roster. So it's going to be a hot seat year for Spielman and Zimmer in Minnesota. They certainly have to compete for the division in the playoffs, coming off a 7-9 record. They will have a healthy Danielle Hunter. They will have some guys they signed in free agency on the defensive line. What's going to happen with last year's first-round pick, Jeff Gladney? I don't know. He had that serious domestic violence issue here a couple months ago. So there's still quite a few question marks, but Vikings fans have been wanting to solidify that offensive line to protect Kirk Cousins, because we know that offense has a lot of talent with Jefferson, Cook, Thielen, Irv Smith at tight end. So this was a huge pick. I don't know a lot about Darrisaw, Spence, but from everything I've heard, he's a guy that's going to be able to start right away. And hopefully they can coach him up correctly. And this is a guy that will start at one tackle position. And then at the other tackle, you have a really solid player in Brian O'Neill, who has been one of the best draft picks that they've had on that offensive line. So it's a huge move for the Vikings. And I think the fans and the public feel really good about what Spielman did, moving back, acquiring more picks, and still getting a guy that's going to be a solid contributor from day one.
Yeah, unlike the Raiders, who draft someone who was going to go in the 3rd round and taking him 17th overall, which is great. So that voice you guys hear, for all my radio listeners, that was Brad the Believer. We do a podcast, The Rest Stop, every Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 10. You can follow me on Twitter at Spencer the Wiz, him on Twitter at Brad the Believer on Twitter and Instagram to see the show live, or you can go on Twitch at Landry Football, right? Landry Football.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. So thank you so much for joining the show, Brad. I really appreciate it.
Spence, appreciate all you do with The Rest Stop, and have a great show tonight, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.